Welcome to the Classical Gabfest, a weekly discussion about the ever-changing world of classical music. I'm your host for this week, Tiffany Liu, and with me as always are Kensho Watanabe and William White. This week we've got a special crossover episode with the Podium Time podcast, an interview series with working conductors hosted by Jeremy D. Cuebas, which recently hosted our own Kensho Watanabe as a guest. But first, we like to start with our prelude segment. So, Will, what do we have today?
This week, we'll be playing a round of everyone's favorite game, Who Dis? Jean Sibelius famously said, "A statue has never been set up in honor of a critic," and indeed, some critics have gotten it famously wrong. In this game, I will read a critical quote panning a now beloved piece of music, and it will be up to my co-hosts to guess what piece is being referenced. And I should say that all of these quotes come from Nicholas Slanimsky's The Lexicon of Musical Invective, a notorious and hilarious book beloved by classical musicians. All right, guys, here is our first quote, and I'm starting off easy here, okay? In this quote, you just have to get the composer. We're not looking for a specific piece yet, all right?
Okay.
So this comes from a review from October 19th, 1844, from the Athenaeum newspaper printed in London. Not long ago, this good town of Leipzig fulfilled the forms of a capital as far as music was concerned, having its conservatives, its liberals, and its radicals. Herr Blank was the leader of the last party, being editor of the revolutionary periodical which set itself against the rights divine of authority, rhythm, and melody as understood by old composers. His compositions, like those of M. Berlioz, were considered as too profoundly poetical for any, save the initiated, to comprehend. The prevalent mood of mind might indeed be inferred from certain works being graced, by way of title, with the name of Hoffmann's bandmaster, Kreisler. Not even the solid and intellectual playing of the composer's lady could make these rhapsodies intelligible.
Schumann, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So I was going to say, is there a trick to this?
No, I told you we're starting off easy. But so just for our listeners' sake, tell us how you arrived.
Well, okay, so I actually forget what year that you said. It was something
1840
something. Yeah, okay. So that places us pretty safely in like romantic German, probably, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just based off where things were happening at that time, if we're going to have sources that talk about this. And then I was pretty lost for a while. And then, of course, the real kicker was the last line, which said the composer's lady. And of course, Robert Schumann's lady was a famed piano virtuoso of the time, Clara Schumann, who would often play with him. And so, I mean, I presume that maybe are we talking about his piano concerto?
No pieces specifically.
No pieces listed.
This, yeah.
I mean, I don't know of other, I assume, in a performance with, well, unless it was like a recital of piano solo works that she was playing that was just of his music. That's the other possibility.
Which she did quite a bit of.
Right, that's right. Anyway, Schumann, Robert Schumann, in this case.
Well done. Gonna get a little harder now.
Oh, good.
This comes from a review in Musical America, published in New York, December 21st, 1918. In these days, when peace is heralded and the world is turning from dissonance to harmony, it comes as a shock to listen to such a program. Those who do not believe that genius is evident in superabundance of noise looked in vain for a new musical message in Mr. Blank's work, nor in the blank piece which the composer conducted was there any cessation from the orgy of discordant sounds. As an exposition of the unhappy state of chaos from which Russia suffers, Mr. Blank's music is interesting, but one hopes fervently that the future may hold better things both for Russia and listeners to Russian music.
Okay, so it's a Russian composer.
who conducted as well.
Who conducted, yeah.
Right.
When before the Russian mention, I was like, maybe it's Mahler, but it's 19...
Right, that's what I thought.
What is it? But 19... It's like past his
In the
death
10s.
year.
1918.
Yeah.
So who do you think this is? Shostakovich? Prokofiev?
I think that's too late.
Oh, it's true. Yeah, right. Because it's...
I think we're talking about somebody who actually, like, you know, we would have to think our way backwards into, like, feeling like it was so discordant. Like, I'm thinking, like, Rachmaninoff even.
Yeah.
Which I don't have the faintest idea if he conducted or not, actually.
Oh, he did. There are recordings
Did
of
he?
him conducting. Yeah. Jury's still out as to how effective a conductor he was.
And presumably somebody who would have been able to make it to the United States.
Right, and that's where actually Rachmaninoff is actually believable, too.
Right.
Hmm.
Do we have any other candidates here?
Well, should we Occam's razor this thing?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable saying Rachmaninoff.
Yeah. Let's say Rachmaninoff. Let's lock it in.
Okay.
Not right. I would go back, Kensho, to your very first couple suggestions.
Oh, really?
Shosti and Prokofiev?
But Shostakovich is too late. I mean, he was born in 19...
He was born in 1906.
Okay. It must be Prokofiev.
It must be,
Yeah, I
and in
guess
fact
so.
it is.
Ah.
So this is talking about Prokofiev, and now you will be very surprised to know what piece this is talking about.
Please don't say Peter and the Wolf.
It is not Peter and the Wolf.
Okay.
No.
That would be hilarious.
Well, okay, let me see. 18?
Yeah, 1918.
So he would have been, let me see, so like almost 30 when he did this.
So early. Classical symphony.
Yeah, classical symphony.
It is the Classical Symphony.
Lol.
This piece that we think of as being like the most neoclassical light music, listener-friendly work of the 20th century. It was called like All Discord and Superabundance of Noise. So what are you going to do? Everyone's a critic.
How times change.
All right, guys, here's your third one. This comes from the New York Tribune, and it is dated December 12th, 1906. In this piece, Monsieur Blank is content with one theme, which has the emotional potency of one of those tunes which the curious may hear in a Chinese theater, shrieked out by an ear-splitting clarinet. This theme serves him for 4 movements, during which there is about as much emotional nuance as warms a problem in algebra. It is a drastic dose of wormwood and asafoetida.
Well, this is hilarious.
Asafoetida. I don't know how you pronounce that
That's
word.
a-
I looked it up. It is like an Iranian herb, where you know how wormwood is a something that flavors absinthe.
Absinthe.
I believe that asafoetida is something similar, like a medicinal flavoring herb.
That's going to really help us here. Thank you.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that
I did want to
elaborate
focus on
description.
that so that we all know. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, other than the asafoetida, though, we had a shrieking clarinet that's prevalent in 4 movements.
I mean, there's quite a lot of allusions to, including the asafoetida, like the kind of Eastern flavor, or like there was a mention of like Chinese theater and
That's right. That's right.
4 movements.
When is it from again? Sorry, the date.
1906.
And these are not presumably all premieres of the works, right? So it can just be any performance of this work. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in this time period, but probably close.
I mean, the piece that comes immediately to mind is Scheherazade, but
I was thinking Scheherazade as well, but could it also be like the Impressionist Spanish?
yeah, but then we run into the problem of 4 movements, which suggests a symphony.
Yeah, or Rhapsody Español. But that's too... I don't know if that's... Yeah. No, I'm doubting myself. If we both thought Scheherazade, then maybe it is. I'm not sure.
I'll just point out that we've had Scheherazade in this game before.
But also that it has a very beefy section in that book devoted to it, and I know because I've like looked at it. But you're right. Probably he wouldn't choose it again.
Or what else could it be? 4 movement.
I mean, the 4 movements and cyclic is already like pretty like. I mean, I'm having a hard time thinking of a symphony that works in this regard. Is it like I don't know the Symphonie Espagnole at all? Is there a theme that reappears throughout of it?
No.
No.
If I could just offer you guys a little more guidance, just note the way that I start this. In blank work, Monsieur Blank is content with one theme.
Okay, so French composers at the turn of the 20th century, which is basically going to land us like proto-Lacis. Lacis is generally too late, so are we in like, we have Ravel, Debussy, Chanson maybe. Franck is probably a little too early.
The composer is among the ones that you have listed.
Oh, God.
And among the ones that you were discussing previously.
Okay, so it's either Debussy or Ravel. But for movement work, we're like missing one.
I would advise you that this is not necessarily an orchestral piece. I would also advise you to just choose one of those two composers, and then we can move on to the next bit here.
Okay, let's go with Ravel, I think,
ding,
because
ding,
we
ding,
know
ding,
that
ding,
Ravel has a lot. Debussy had a streak of exoticism in his music as well, but I think Ravel goes towards the direction that we were talking about.
Okay.
And I have no idea what piece we're talking about, frankly.
It's not a piece that you would expect. This is another case of like the classical symphony that we were just talking about.
Is it the string quartet?
It is, in fact, Ravel's string quartet.
Where is the common theme?
You got me.
And where's the freaking clarinet? I mean, I know it didn't said like a clarinet. I know.
But still, that's very misleading. No, I agree with you. This is bullshit.
That just about does it for this week's Prelude segment, but before we wrap up, we'd like to remind our listeners that we do periodic listener-generated Name That Tune rounds, so we invite you to try to stump us. Check our show notes, where you'll find a link to the form where you can upload a 30-second unidentified piece of classical music for us to try to identify. And with that, now we are going to hear an abridged version of Kensho's appearance on the Podium Time podcast. If you like what you hear and you want to listen to the whole episode, or for that matter, any of the other fascinating interviews in the Podium Time archive, the link to their site is in our show notes, and of course you can find their podcast on whatever app you're listening to currently.
Welcome to Podium Time. We're here with Kensho Watanabe. Kensho, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So could you give us a quick introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am a Japanese-American conductor. I was born in Japan, moved to the States when I was 5. Thought I was going to be a doctor, and just around the time I was finishing up college, decided to be a conductor. So kind of a late bloomer, let's say. And I am formerly the assistant conductor of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And before all of the craziness that we've experienced this year, I was just starting my kind of international guest conducting career. So raring at the bit to get back to that at some time in the future.
Yeah, I think we all are. Let's see. So you were probably doing music at some capacity before you started conducting, right?
Yeah. So I started the violin at the age of 2.
Oh, wow.
Through the Suzuki method, which is kind of the average age of most people that start Suzuki, at least in Japan. And continued throughout. And so violin was very much my main instrument. And like most people, you play in orchestras, and that's kind of your first entry point into looking at a conductor and wondering what that's like. But I never really took it seriously or tried it or had any ambition to be a conductor until my freshman or sophomore year of college, I would say.
And what was that? What clicked that for you?
So I was playing violin, and I did my undergrad at Yale. And I would say the most amazing thing about Yale is that there are a lot of student-run music ensembles, not just for classical music, but also pops and some pickup groups. And it's just such a thriving artistic environment that it is not led by professors or administrative staff, but really by the students. And so I was really enticed by that. And so I was playing in the kind of university-sanctioned Yale Symphony Orchestra, I was playing violin in. And then I had picked up viola a few years prior. So I was like, hey, I probably need like another ensemble to play viola in, just because that's what, college, like you're supposed to do extracurriculars and go crazy. So I auditioned for a small, like string orchestra then. And of course, since it's student run, I was auditioning in front of 3 seniors of the group. And in kind of typical fashion, they kind of twisted my arm into conducting this ensemble. I walked in just thinking that I was going to audition for viola, and they were like, okay, sounds good, but do you have any conducting experience? And I said, no. And maybe I should have stopped there. I'm glad that I didn't stop, I guess. But I said no, but, and what followed the but was, I had taken some score study or score analysis classes at pre-college Juilliard before coming to Yale. And so I kind of have a sense of it, probably being a freshman trying to just, impress them a little bit, but little did I know that would lead to, oh, great. So why don't you come in next week and you'll conduct, I think it was Elgar or something, or no, Mendelssohn String Symphony. We have a first rehearsal on Mendelssohn String Symphony next week. So why don't you come in and conduct that? What was nice about that was that it was a gift for sure, because certainly conducting opportunities are not easily found like that normally. But at the same time, it wasn't like I had planned on it. And so and like with most of my life, I would say, something like that is handed to me. I really go full on and just go at it. So I just really fully immerse myself into, okay, what is it that I have to do to not only learn a score, but also run a rehearsal surrounded by people that are older than me? Boy, does that ring true now until I'm probably, 60 years old, right? So boy, was that a great introduction to conducting that I didn't know I really needed. And so throughout my time at Yale, I was conducting ensembles just for fun. I had never taken a lesson really for the mechanics or the technique of conducting. And the more I did it, the more I loved it. But still, there was this thing of I had lost my grandfather on my mother's side to colon cancer when I was 5. And it was just shortly after we had moved to the States. And I think it was we moved to the States in May, and then November of that year, my grandfather passed. And so I still remember getting the phone call that he had cancer and that he didn't have much time and we had to go back to Japan. And so that obviously left an indelible mark on me in terms of wanting to be someone that could save, very much like, this is certainly not a unique story in terms of how someone decides to be a doctor. Losing a family member is usually the first kind of spark for that in a way, and not the best ways. But, and so I had just this in my back of my head that I was going to be a doctor ever since I was 5. So, luckily I was good in the math and sciences, because that would have been a tragedy if I, was planning on being a doctor, but not excel in those fields. Yeah. So I had already gone down this track. And the reason why I picked Yale was that obviously it's a great school. And it was a school in which I was allowed to do both academics extremely seriously and have this wealth of performing opportunities on my instrument. But I never went beyond that. It went as far as just that Yale had a wonderful program, a 5-year program, a BA/MM program, where I could get a degree in science and stay 1 extra year and get a master's in music in violin. So for me, that was the finish line for my musical training. It was kind of like, okay, do my pre-med classes, do all this stuff, get a master's in music and violin performance. I mean, that's an achievement, right? I was like, that's an achievement. I think that's a good place for me to, really then put that away and devote myself to the medical studies, because that's what I was planning on doing. In a way, the conducting started to kind of, wedge its way into my consciousness in terms of what possible things I could do with my life. And so by the time I reached my senior year, and I had just taken the MCATs, which is like the SATs for medical schools, and I finished those, and I had spent the last 2 or 3 summers either taking extra science classes to just fulfill the requirements, or working in a lab decapitating rats and studying their brains and all that. I was like, okay, enough of that. I need to do something completely different this summer. Yeah. So that's when I actually ended up going to the Malta School up in Hancock, Maine. And that was the revelatory summer for me. This was the first time I was completely immersing myself in conducting, and was there for 6 weeks and studying with Michael Jimbo. And he and I had many conversations throughout the 3 summers I was there. I went 2 more summers after that about just kind of what I should do with my life. Here I was at this precipice, like, do I apply to medical schools now, or do I at least try for graduate schools in conducting and see what's going on? And he was such a wonderful guide in helping me go through that, but yeah, what kind of changed, or what sparked the inspiration behind what is now my life and my career, is really the Montauk School, and also this kind of all this wonderful experience that I had, not knowing better, any better, in terms of just, well, I was asked to conduct, so I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what gets us from Yale to Philly? What does that path look like?
So after that first number of Montauk, I was like, okay, I enjoy this enough. I still don't know anything, I just wanted to kind of explore what it would be like. I had a taste of it for 6 weeks in Maine, and then I wanted to see, like, okay, well, with the abilities that I have, I knew that I was a strong musician. I was good enough to get into a master's degree program in performance. And I knew that was what was ahead of me as well, right? I had this 1 year left at Yale to complete my master's of music, which would be my first time ever only doing music in school, because ever since, kindergarten, first grade, I was always going to school, going home, practicing. Now, suddenly, I was still going to school, and it was now classes in music, but it was really just music all the time, and had much more time to practice. Whether or not I actually used that time to practice the violin, I'm not sure, because I was already kind of in the conducting world.
Yeah.
But so I had this opportunity to be like, okay, so I'm going to spend this next year in music. Why not look at some conducting programs and apply and see what happens? So I applied to a few programs, got a few auditions, and one of the places that I really wanted to go and to study, because I had read an article that the Yale, I think the alumni magazine put out or something, like during that year or something, I don't know where, about Otto Werner Müller, who was teaching at Curtis, because he had previously taught at Yale. And I was like, wow, this guy has taught all these amazing conductors, and he seems pretty tough, and I like challenges. And I was like, yeah, like maybe if I can get into Curtis, then I don't know, maybe I have a shot, like maybe I have a fighting chance to be a conductor. Very like basic thinking, right? Because certainly not a guarantee. You go to Curtis, I mean, no one cares, just because it's not like, it's not like you go to Harvard Law and, you're basically guaranteed some, floor of an opportunity to be a lawyer, right? Mm-hmm. Here you are at Curtis. I mean, again, no one cares.
You still got to,
but yeah. So I just like, what? Why don't I just see? And fast forward to the end here, the only school I got into was Curtis. So I was like, well, either this is a sign or this is a sign. And so at that point, I said, this is too good of an opportunity to pass up. I knew that my MCAT score was valid for 3 years. So I was like, okay, I've already used up 1 year, right? Because I had just finished my master's. I had 2 more years of a window to just see if this works. So I said, maybe I'll go to Curtis, and within 6 months, Müller will kick me out of his studio, and then I'll know exactly, where I stand in the world in terms of whether or not I can conduct.
Yeah, that's your answer.
And I remember after my first year, I said, okay, this year I'm going to have to at least apply to medical schools, just so that my scores don't go to waste. And, people say that writing out your thoughts really distills them and puts them into focus and gives you almost like a third person view on your inner thoughts or how you write or how you think. And this was really like the perfect case of this, because the first step in applying to medical school is writing your personal statement about why you want to be a doctor. And of course, I was connecting it to my experiences with music and with some experiences that I've had, back in school. I was volunteering for a geriatric ward at Yale New Haven Hospital, working with patients that were either already had dementia or susceptible to dementia. So I was really working in a pretty difficult environment in terms of seeing things like that and relating it to how I would like to help people and, connect with people in that way and be a doctor. And then finished it, edited it, felt really good about it. And then I just read it over just to look over my work. And I finished reading it and I was like, wow, I don't believe a single sentence. In a way I did, but it was such a projection of that 5-year-old me and kind of looking back on at that time, like 15 to 18 years of experience afterwards of leading up to this moment of actually applying to medical school. And this is where you kind of take stock as to how you've changed and how you've evolved and how your goals can change. And I remember I just read it and then I called my parents. I was like, yeah, I don't think I can go through with this. I just really believe that at this point, conducting is something that I don't even know if I was convinced that this was for me, but at least I knew that medicine was not, And so I said, that's the wrong turn. I'm going to take this road until I get to another dead end, And luckily, I haven't found that dead end yet. But you never know when that's going to be.
Not yet.
But I'm just thankful that you're not able to take that kind of leap without a good support system. At least one that is eventually understanding. I mean, from my parents' standpoint, I think it was just a big surprise. I mean, obviously there were telltale warning signs, right? Like, oh, he's going to get a master's in violin performance. Interesting. Oh, he wants to at least go and see what Curtis is about. Interesting. So, I mean, there were some warning signs. It wasn't like it was a huge reveal, but your child thinks that he's going to be a doctor, and it's been this kind of almost 2-decade journey to get there, and suddenly a hard left turn, right? So they obviously eventually came around, but I mean, I'm just thankful that I had a support system where I felt safe enough to take that leap, because I think most people don't, or I wouldn't assume, but some people probably do not have that, and maybe took the more reliable way to be like, okay, well, if I put my head down and work really hard in med school and don't sleep for 10 years, then I can become a doctor of some respectable value, right? But I went the other direction, put my head down, and 10 years later, I didn't really know where I stood in conducting, but I did it, so.
So then, after Curtis, how did you start working with Yannick?
Yeah, again, I mean, so many of the guests on this podcast talk about luck, right? I mean, in terms of just having that wonderful opportunity, and my goodness, I mean, I can't imagine what my career or life would be without Yannick, really. I mean, I just lucked out so much. And so toward the end of my second year at Curtis, Mr. Mueller was going to retire. And so I was kind of stuck in this limbo period where most of his students stay at least 3 years, if not 4, before graduating. And so I was kind of like, okay, well, what do I do with this third year? Luckily, in a way, he moved to New York. So the school was nice enough to pay for us to travel there.
Oh, wow.
To take lessons with him. But obviously it wasn't the same. I mean, before, we would meet with him for the length of the class was not prescribed, let's say, but we would show up twice a week to his apartment to have class. Classes could range from, I know you've heard from many of my other Mueller family, they could range from 2 hours to 5, just depending on how much he wanted to regale us with his knowledge. I don't know what's the right word for that. And so it just wasn't the same. We were only going in once a week, and probably we had a train schedule, so it was very limited. Like, we knew it was going to only be 2 hours, and so it was not really the same environment. And at the end of that, there were some rumblings at the time that Yannick was going to be involved somehow with the program. And just around that time, so this is during my third year at Curtis, where I was still traveling back and forth between New York, I occasionally, so Curtis is a little bit interesting. I don't know if you know about the orchestral program at Curtis. So usually, with a university or like orchestra program, there are a fair number of orchestra concerts, and the musicians kind of cycle through, right? So you don't necessarily play every program, but there are at least, 5 or 6 programs a year, I would say. It would be safe to say. So Curtis is different because it's such a small school. There's not this kind of cycling ability. So we only do 3 concerts a year.
Oh, wow.
And they usually try to get some guest conductors, maybe some alums. And so Yannick was a little bit too busy to do concerts, but he was willing to do, he was able to do some readings, in the afternoon before a concert on a weekend or something. And so one of those first readings that I think it was maybe the second reading that he did with the Curtis Symphony was Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. And it just so happened that the Philadelphia Orchestra was doing it that week as well. So convenient, right? And I was tasked to prep the orchestra. We had about 2.5 hour rehearsal to kind of read through the piece and rehearse it so that it was as close to rehearsed before the maestro came in. And once I heard that once I saw that the orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra, was doing it, I was like, okay, I gotta at least go see him rehearse this piece to just get a sense of what he does in this piece. Because I mean, as you know, I mean, there are so many ways to do that piece, especially the ending and all this stuff. So I don't know how, but I got myself into the rehearsal, and it was one of those reading rehearsals, so I could just go in and watch and observe, and I got my score out, and I just took down as much as I could in terms of just what does he do here? How is he beating this? Oh, okay. And I don't think I was hearing things, but it was more about just me observing him and watching and what was the pacing of all of this, and just, getting as much information as possible. And I managed to, rehearse the orchestra after that. And then Yannick came in and did the reading, and he was kind of like, how are they doing everything that I had? It was well prepared, and he was saying like who did the preparation, and so that's the first time I met him. And maybe a few weeks after that, I was told that Yannick was going to start this conductor fellowship program at Curtis, and this is what the program looks like right now in terms of having 2 conductors and that he mentors. And I was told that they were going to hold auditions, and for fairness sake, they were going to ask me to re-audition for that fellowship along with a pool of other conductors. And I said, fine, that's fair. But I told them, look, it's not a guarantee that I'm going to be able to get in. So I'm going to go audition for some other programs, right? So I didn't really want to leave Philly or leave the area. So I just looked at Juilliard, and this was still when Alan Gilbert was there. And so I said, that's probably a good program to be in. New York would be great. And so I went and had that audition. I think the Curtis audition was first, and then I went to go do this audition at Juilliard. And I passed through some of the first few rounds, and 2 things happened during that trip that I think about quite often, because it really kind of changed in a way the trajectory of how I was going to go. The first one was that I was sitting in between some of these rounds, I was having coffee with a friend at Le Pain Quotidien, the one that everybody goes to before shows at Lincoln Center. If you've ever gone to a show in Lincoln Center, the Pain Quotidien is the place to be. And I was sitting there with a friend, and who walks in but Yannick? And this is one of the amazing things about Yannick, and something that I try to adopt as well. He walks in, we lock eyes, and he instantly recognizes me. After just one meeting, remembered my name, and said, what are you doing in New York? Right? Like random.
Yeah.
And I said, well, so blah, blah, blah. The story is that I, know that you're doing this program at Curtis, but I just auditioned for it, but I don't know if I'm going to get in, so I'm here at Juilliard, just covering my bases. And he was like, okay, well, I don't want to tell you not to audition, but I'm looking forward to working with you next year. And I was like, shit, like amazing, right?
Yeah.
And
that's a good hint from
well, yeah, and to hear it from Yannick, and also the fact that I think there's the weekend, I don't know if you heard about this, but amazing, and this is where I'm just amazed. He was doing Traviata at the Met, and at the same time he was doing Matthew Passion in Philly. So on that Saturday, I think, and this was like a lead up to it, but on that Saturday he conducted a matinee of Traviata, took a train or drove to Philly, and then conducted Matthew Passion in the evening in Philadelphia. Okay? Not many people do that. Right? So in the midst of all of this craziness in his life, he walks in to just get some bite to eat, right? At Pain Quotidien. Probably wasn't even going to sit down, just getting something to go, right? In between rehearsals or whatever. It's one thing to say hello and like, nice to see you. Okay, I'm out of here. To actually walk over to me, who he didn't know at the time. I mean, this would be more believable now because of our history and how much we know each other. To come over to me after that and just give me that word of encouragement, I mean, this just tells you what kind of person he is. And so I make an effort to do the same for people that I've met before, or just to really try my best to remember their names and, connect with them in a meaningful way. So that was the first kind of amazing thing that happened that day. The second amazing thing that happened that day was that I didn't get into Juilliard. And I had made it to the finals, but then didn't pass. But luckily for me, Alan and also Jim Ross did some like post-mortem interviews with the people that did not get in. And they sat me down, and Alan really had probably the best thing to tell me at that time. He said, look, coming from a Mueller student, because he studied with him, he said, coming from Mueller student, you have absorbed 150% of everything that Mr. Mueller has told you over the last 3 years at Curtis. What is going to make you not only a better conductor, but a conductor that is a reflection of who you are, is to start to break those rules and get out of the box that you have been in. And this is not an indictment to how Mr. Mueller teaches, but there's obviously with a lot of teachers, especially these kind of venerated, very important monolithic teachers, they have their way of conducting or their technique. And this was the best piece of advice that I could have gotten at that time, coming from someone that knows what I had just experienced. And he said, you need to learn how to break these rules. And so those two events happened in the same day. Okay, many days in my life already. I'm still young, but like there are many days in my life. But those two events, I mean, what are the chances that I have these kind of meaningful conversations with both Alan Gilbert and Yannick Nézist again? It's just insane. And the next 2 years, so I spent a total of 5 years at Curtis, 3 years with Mr. Mueller, with the third one being kind of a half year back and forth between New York and Philly, and then 2 unbelievable years being kind of the guinea pig for this new conducting fellowship program that Curtis had started with Yannick. That's exactly what Yannick was able to do for me, was just get me to access something that was really truly me in my conducting, with the solid foundation of knowledge and technique that I had gained from Mr. Mueller. So I wouldn't have been able to answer for what Alan told me and what Yannick eventually got out of me if I hadn't had this foundation for 3 years. Yeah. And so it just worked out timing wise and everything. That's a pretty cool day that I do think about quite often in terms of how freaking lucky I was, you know.
Yeah, that's an incredible story.
So that's how I met Yannick. It's a long story, but it's an amazing one, and I'm just thankful.
Mm-hmm. And you worked for him for 2 years at Curtis, and then you were his assistant for 3 years. Is that right?
Yes. So I finished out my mentorship, my fellowship, and then I had 1 year of kind of floating around and auditioning for various orchestras for assistant positions, and I was I had a long run of being runner-up to jobs. And, you know the frustration that comes with that. But, in the end, it allowed me to be able to be free to take the Philadelphia Orchestra Assistant Conductor audition after 1 year. And, luckily I was able to get that job. And, one thing I didn't mention, while I was studying at Curtis, I also, similar to the thing about Yale, where I was looking for an ensemble to play with on viola, I was kind of like, well, gee, I have this master's in violin performance. I need to keep my chops up. Like, I'm not going to just be one of those conductors that, used to play an instrument but can't play anymore. And so I was like, look, I probably just need to just take some auditions or something just to keep my chops up. And so the Philadelphia Orchestra sub audition was up for that year. I think it was in 2012. So I said, what the heck? I've never taken an orchestral audition before. And I walked into the audition and I got on the sub list. It was crazy. I was just like, I was really doing it just to practice. And suddenly here I was on the sub list. And so I started to be able to play in the Philadelphia Orchestra, starting with some like summer programs. I'll never forget. This is such a non sequitur that you can even edit out, but it's just such a great story. My first ever gig with the Philadelphia Orchestra was at the Mann Center for the Performing Arts, which is a semi-outdoor venue. And we were playing a concert of all John Williams. Okay. Sounds cool. But if anyone knows about playing John Williams, especially a first or second violin part or a flute part,
or a brass
it's
part,
crazy, or a brass part. I mean, everything is just hard, right? It's not easy music. And they sat me next to the legendary Jerry Wigler, is a World War II vet, stormed the beaches of Normandy, probably was around 90, I want to say. He just celebrated his 100th birthday recently. So it's literally this pairing of like the youngest person ever and like the oldest person, the most experienced person who used to play in the orchestra and then retired and now was subbing.
Yeah,
So that's why this is a very odd couple of people to kind of sit on a stand together. But anyways, Jerry, bless his heart, sitting next to me, and I hope he doesn't mind I tell the story because it's so great and I think it's fun. We opened it up, and I think it was Harry Potter was the first thing on the docket for that morning. Hedwig's theme, where all those, it's just like crazy scales and everything. It just goes on and I practiced the crap out of it, but it was stressed, right? Like these are the first notes that I'm going to play as a violinist at the Philadelphia Orchestra. He slaps his bow on the music, and he was like, "I'm not going to play any of these notes, so it's all on you." Downbeat, and I'm just like, like, okay, this is how it's going to be, right? Yeah. And so that was my start, but then I got to do some really awesome things as well. Like the first time I got to play under Yannick was a Bruckner 7, and that piece holds a very special place in my heart because my mother claims that that's the first piece I heard in utero. So like she went to a concert in Japan and it was Bruckner 7, and she remembers like telling me internally like, hey, this is Bruckner 7 and this is the piece, and I'm gonna want you to play violin and all this stuff. And that was kind of this, apparently the legend holds that it's the first piece of music I heard, and I love the piece, and I still look forward to the day I get to conduct that with my parents in the audience, because I think that would be kind of a pretty amazing moment. But anyways, I got to play that piece with Yannick conducting in the Philadelphia Orchestra. I got to work with just a plethora of amazing conductors. I did a Sibelius 6 and 7 with Simon Rattle and played under Vladimir Yurovsky. And what an amazing opportunity to learn from conductors without even speaking to them. Like the dialogue that happens, the nonverbal communication, right, that you can learn just from sitting in the orchestra. It was just such a gold mine for information, and just also having empathy for what is it like to be a musician, a professional musician, an extremely high caliber musician in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and go through the grind of every week having a new program. And then I got called into some summer programs where you learn programs, or where you perform and learn programs every day of the week, where you're doing 4 to 5 programs a week and just churning them out. Also, the rehearsal strategies for conductors, right? When you got one rehearsal, just get it together, dude. Yeah. We're not interested in your philosophical dissertation on how a symphony is put together. No, let's just get this together and make it through tonight so we can get ready for tomorrow, right? Learning all those things before I even stepped foot in that orchestra as an assistant conductor was the greatest advantage that I had. Because, I mean, think about it. Most people get an assistantship, you take what you can get, right? Wherever assistantship, every conductor in school is dreaming of just landing an assistantship so they can get an opportunity to be in that professional environment. Yeah. So then you walk into a building that is full of people that you don't know. But here I was, having subbed for 3 or 4 years before getting this assistantship, walking in, knowing basically every single person in the building, right? It just felt like I was going to work again every day. Slightly different role, but in terms of having empathy for the musicians, understanding the work environment, the hierarchy of people, knowing Yannick, it just was the most sensible, logical place to have a first assistantship, which sounds ridiculous because it's insane that my first job was with the Philadelphia Orchestra, right? Like no one ever would, whatever they are, whoever they are, no one ever deserves that. Like I was so lucky. It's like such a fortuitous event that just everything all the roads kind of just pointed back to the Philadelphia Orchestra and Philly. And this is why 10 years after moving here, I'm still in the city, right? I'm still in Philly. I love this place and I consider it home. So,
I mean, that is the greatest opportunity I think a conductor can have, just being on the other side. I think we get so disconnected from what that's like. And yeah, you can go to you can go observe all the rehearsals you want, but nothing's going to be more impactful and more just dense with understanding than actually playing in a string section or playing and actually reacting as a musician to those slight movements. That's such an incredible opportunity. So I'm curious, what else? I mean, you've had a bunch of mentors through your career. What else did you learn? What else? Let's start with Yannick while we're there. What else did you learn from him? What else did he, really make an impact on you as a conductor?
He has an amazing, uncanny ability to really create in the moment. It's just a way of being in terms of what a performance means to a conductor. Is the performance just a repeat of or a confirmation of everything that you do in rehearsal? Or is a performance the product of all the things that you've done in rehearsal, and the performance becomes like the moment that the flowers and everything kind of bloom, where it's not a repeat or a rehashing of what's done in rehearsal, but somehow you've taken it to another level.
I think
or
confirmation was a good word for the contrast of that. Like, we've done all these things in rehearsal, and now we're just doing it once more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Then will it bloom? That's a great visual.
Right. And like we learn, and we are told always that, like, hey, save a little bit in the tank for the performance to give a little more energy. But that's like an abstraction of what it really means. I think it's more about finding a narrative throughout the week. Like, you hear what the orchestra has to offer you. How can you imagine what is the ideal, or, because the ideal is what you have in your head. But then you have to manage what you're getting back in response and incorporating what the orchestra gives you as well into your vision for the piece. And when Yannick says this all the time, it's a two-way street, right? You can come in with all your ideas, but if you don't listen and if you don't take in what they offer, it's not a conversation.
Yeah.
But he has this amazing ability of really setting it up so that it's a progression throughout the week, and not just through the rehearsals, but through performance number 1, performance number 2, performance number 3. And as an assistant to him, he's always interested in, okay, after the first performance, what did you hear? What can we do better? Did you hear this? What can we do? Oh, maybe this was a little bit too slow. Maybe I'll try this with a transition in the second performance. And always self-reflecting and analyzing. And so on top of that, he's able to, I've seen so many times where in key moments, you just see him completely take over. You see him just completely change the trajectory of where the piece was going in a way that is just so absolutely thrilling. And it's a skill that I haven't figured out yet. But I think you just see the unabated courage that he has that is generated from the trust that he has in the ensemble that he's conducting, and vice versa. But the greatest lesson that I think I learned from him was he is the most positive, encouraging, supportive presence in the room. And I think that is possibly the most important thing that any leader, not just a conductor, but any leader has a responsibility for. And he does this with ease. And you can imagine a backstage scene after a performance in Philly or at the Met or at Carnegie Hall, where there is just a mob of people trying to have their 5 seconds with Yannick. Some of them are obviously meaningful connections, but even the people that, he doesn't even know who they are, he makes each person feel like they're the only person in that room. And thanks you for being here, and is just so gracious. And this is something that I've learned. And, you have to have some innate ability to relate to people to do this. But it's something that I work and I practice every time. And it doesn't matter what situation I'm in, I will try and do this. And it's hard. It's hard when you are getting pulled in so many directions and people want you to meet X and Y donor and you have to sign this and blah, blah, blah. And he does it with ease.
I love your emphasis that is something that we can work on. Like, that is something we can actively do, because this is something that I have actively been working on for years. Like, if you take my high school, early college self, that's not me at all anymore, because I've had to develop just going in there and being enthusiastic with everybody, and it's tough, but it's something you can absolutely do if you don't feel like that's you. So who are some of your other mentors? What have you learned from those people?
So I mentioned Michael Jimbo earlier, And I would be remiss to not mention him because he really helped me believe that I at least had something that would let me at least study the art of conducting and possibly make it, because the greatest fear, especially with someone that spent basically their entire life thinking they were meant to do something, and then have a 6-week experience change all of that.
Yeah.
That's, talking about the shock that my parents felt. I mean, think about the shock that does on your own psyche or your own person. And just talking me through that and being supportive, of a student that he just met 5 weeks ago, and helping me through just making that decision, and the most supportive, encouraging, never really forcing me. I think the strongest thing he said was like, yeah, like you really should try at least, like that was probably the strongest thing he said, and I just got really lucky, and then the conductor of the Yale Symphony Orchestra at the time that I was there, Toshiyuki Shimada, he was the one that actually first came to one of these string orchestra concerts that I conducted. And he was like, hey, you actually have something there. Why don't you try assistant conducting the Yale Symphony? So I got to do, actually the first piece that I conducted with the Yale Symphony was Prélude à l'après-midi d'enfant. Yeah, like again, no business doing that at the age of 19, being the first piece that you conduct. And so I just had a lot of people that were willing to take risks. They were willing to take risks on me.
Well, Kensho, this has been an absolute delight. We have 2 more quick questions to end out the interview if you've got a couple minutes.
Of course.
First one is our hidden gem. What's a composer, piece, body of work that you think has been underserved?
I've been obsessed with this piece by a young composer, also from Curtis, named Viet Quang, and he wrote a double oboe concerto called Extraordinarily Fancy. And it's just a delight of a piece, and it uses multiphonics in the oboes, and the particular performance that's on YouTube is with the Kaleidoscope Chamber Orchestra, so that it's without a conductor. But if ever they need a conductor to do this piece, I'm there for that, because I freaking love this piece. Do you know it?
No.
It's such a cool piece. And I mean, actually explore his website, because there's so much cool music coming out of this brilliant composer.
Awesome. And then our final question, feel free to repeat something we've already talked about if that is the answer, but what's a message you would put on the billboard to send out to all the conductors listening?
Oh, man. I mean, it would be really off-brand of me to come up with something else at this point. So the question really is, have you been the most positive, encouraging, supportive person in the room today?
Yeah. Well, Kensho, thanks so much for chatting with me today. Again, this was a joy, and I think we dug into some stuff that we don't usually get to talk about.
I had a great time. I apologize for my ranting and raving, but I think we talked about some important things.
Absolutely.
Well, Kensho, that was a fantastic episode of Podium Time, a podcast that I really enjoyed listening to. It was a thrill to hear you on it, and bravo.
Thanks. And I had such a great time talking to Jeremy, too. So big thanks to Jeremy for hosting me and for putting together this great podcast series.
Once more, if listeners would like to check out the full episode or anything else in the Podium Time archive, you may visit our show notes, where we will include a link to their podcast. And with that, it's time to wrap up this episode of the Classical Gabfest. I'm Tiffany Liu, and on behalf of Kensho Watanabe and William White, I'd like to thank you so much for listening, and to encourage you to subscribe and rate us on your podcast app of choice. We'd also love your help spreading the word about the show on social media, where you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can reach us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy listening, and we'll be with you next week.